Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I want to say thank you to the conference organizers for putting together this wonderful conference, and also for the wonderful approach to the logistics for the conference. I found it quite helpful in organizing my trip to South Africa. My paper today will be on incentivizing power generation, reaping the benefits of working with NBT. This is the outline of my presentation. I'll give a contextual background to the paper, then talk about the state of power generation in Nigeria at the moment. I'll look at the reform objectives of the Electric Power Sector Reform Act, part of which Dr. Diko has already touched on. I'll introduce NBT, talk about its functional areas, and talk about the role of the bulk trader in the transitional electricity market. Again, Dr. Diko, in his presentation, talked about the different stages of market reform, of which we are about to enter into the transitional electricity market. The bulk trader is involved in a lot of PPA negotiations. So I'll mention something about PPA negotiations, and also talk about the fact is that the bulk trader was established to provide, to be a credit enhancement mechanism in the power market. So I'll talk about the World Bank role in ensuring that the bulk trader is able to incentivize power generation in Nigeria. I'll talk about the risk allocation as well and the key risks in the power sector value chain. And I'll talk about the what we're doing to develop a customizable form PPA. In terms of background, the availability of adequate power supply, of course, is a critical consideration in economic development. There's no way you can talk about any modern economy without talking about power supply for fueling their economic development. And so it's critical, whether you're talking about education, commerce, every aspect of life, there's something to do with electricity. And many African countries are currently in the process of reforming their power sectors with a view to bringing in more power into the country to ensure that they have adequate power supply for their citizens. And of course, power generation, which I'll focus on being as part of the mandate of NBT, it's the first part of the electricity value chain that runs all the way to consumers. And it's a very capital-intensive undertaking and very risk intensive. And so the thing is that because it's so capital intensive, without providing a mechanism for ensuring that people that want to invest in power actually recoup their investments, nobody is going to spend a dime on power generation because it costs so much. Rule of the thumb is that it takes about $1 million to generate a megawatt. So anybody thinking about doing a major power project, first thing you ask is, who is going to be the off-taker for this power? If I'm not sure that I'm going to have a market for this power, I'm not going to go into it in the first place. And that is the key reason why the bulk trader was established in the first place. So I wanted to give a snapshot of the state of power generation in Nigeria. The transmission company estimates that the current peak demand is about 11,660 megawatts. Some consider that this may actually be conservative because you actually need to do a proper load demand study before you can actually ascertain what the peak demand forecast is. Now, the peak generation record is at the moment, it was set in December 2012, 4,517 megawatts. And when you consider the fact that here in South Africa that we're doing this conference, South Africa has installed capacity of ESCOM has installed capacity of up to 40,000 megawatts. This almost sounds laughable because for South Africa, the 40,000 megawatts is for a population of about 50 million. While in Nigeria, we are grappling with these tiny figures for a population of about 160 million. So there's a lot of work to be done if we are to get anywhere near the developmental aspirations of a country. The maximum installed available capacity to date, 6965 megawatts. Of course, keep in mind that the installed capacity is different from what's actually functional in the country, because by the time we discount plants that have broken down, plants that are being serviced, plants that are out for one reason or the other, you now get into these dismal figures. Now, the Power Sector Reform Act was enacted in 2005. And the key objective for enacting it, Dr. Diko of NERC has already touched on this. The act was enacted to provide for the unbundling of the power sector, because hitherto we had this big monolithic entity called NEPA, which later metamorphosed into, as part of the reform, it changed into PHCN, and then PHCN, it was broken further into a lot of successor entities in the generation, transmission, and distribution segments. And the Act also paved the way for the enhanced private sector participation and competition in the power sector. And again, it's part of where the bulk trader comes in at the moment. We have negotiations with so many private sector entities that want to build power plants in Nigeria. Something like that wouldn't have been possible a couple of years ago. But because the bulk trader is there as the face of the government, assuring investors that if you invest in the country's power generation sector, there is an entity that is creditworthy enough to pay you for your power. So a lot of private sector interest has suddenly picked up in the power generation segment in the country. The Act also created the sector regulator NERC, and also provided for the licensing and regulation of key segments of the electricity value chain. The bulk trader, of course, was established pursuant to this Act. Essentially, the Act said that created a licensing framework, and the bulk trader is actually a trading licensee of NERC, and it has a license to buy power in bulk from electricity generation companies and IPPs, and resell that power in bulk as well to the distribution companies, as well as a class of consumers called eligible customers. Eligible customers are customers that consume significant load to the point where they can actually take their power from the national grid. So they don't buy power from local distribution. They like big industries that can buy power from the national, that are hooked up to the national grid. So the bulk trader, as a trading licensee, will buy power and resell power to these entities. It was incorporated in 2010, so it's been in existence for getting close to 3 years now, but it was actually operationalized in 2011 when the board of the company was inaugurated in August of 2011. And the vision of the company is a Nigeria where power is taken for granted. I'm not sure, this is my first time of coming to South Africa, so I know that there was time in the news where I read about power cuts here and there. For the moment I've been here, I've not seen the power blink at all. In Nigeria, it's not quite like that. The power is one of those things you can't take for granted. Okay? If you're planning to travel to South Africa for a conference, you need to ensure that, hey, have I ironed my clothes? Okay? If I put this thing off till morning, NEPA may give me a shocker. Okay? Have I shaved? Have I cut my hair? If you take these things for granted, you could be absolutely surprised. In the morning, the power goes off, and it goes off for the whole day. So we hope that the bulk trader can actually take Nigeria to the point where if you're planning anything, whether you're planning a party, you're planning a conference, a seminar, anything, you can actually, as you're thinking about the logistics for the event, you're not actually counting power as one of the things that could go wrong. You can take it for granted that power will not go wrong. I can think of any other thing, but not power. But how do we get there? The bulk trader has these functional areas. We have a board of directors. It's a 9-man board chaired by the Honorable Minister of Finance. And the other members of the board include the Minister of Power, the Director General of the Bureau of Public Enterprises. There's a CEO of one of the distribution companies who is there to represent the interests of distribution companies on the board of the bulk trader. Given that the power we buy from generation companies, we sell to the distribution companies. It also has some independent members of the board. And these are the key departments: power procurement, finance, legal, and HR and admin. I head the legal department, but these other departments are very critical in the work we do. The key role of the bulk trader in the transmission electricity market are outlined here. The bulk trader functions as a broker between power producers and distribution companies because it's a middleman role. We buy power, we sell power. But I must point out, though, that perhaps the fact that it's called a PLC may be a bit of a misnomer because the bulk trader buys and sells power at the same price. It doesn't add a margin. It wasn't set up as a profit-making entity. And the reason is obvious, because if the bulk trader were to be a profit-making entity, who bears the cost eventually? The consumers. The consumers. So the government, in a bid to ensure that the cost of power is also affordable for consumers, decided that the bulk trader will not be a profit-making entity. We simply buy power and sell power at the same price. We get some market charges for rendering that service in the market, but it's not a profit. And we expected to sign PPAs with PHCN successor generation companies being privatized. As I mentioned, and as Dr. Diko had mentioned as well, the power sector is currently being privatized in the country. PHCN has been broken down into different segments in the power chain, in the power sector value chain, that are being privatized. And February 21st of this year, we signed 7 PPAs with these generation companies that are being privatized, that the investors will be taking over in the next couple of months. We also expected to assume existing PPA obligations that PHCN entered into before coming into operation of the bulk trader. There are about 3 PPAs here. There's a PPA with Shell, PPA with AES, PPA with AGIP that we're expected to inherit from PHCN as PHCN is being wound down. And we also have the government has some international power contracts with because Nigeria also supplies power to Benin Republic and Niger Republic. We'll take over these power supply obligations as well. We're expected to negotiate and execute PPAs with potential IPPs. At the moment, we have several IPPs in our queue, and there are different stages of developing their projects. And when they come up to the point of negotiating PPAs, we negotiate the PPAs. We have goals that we've set to ramp up the quantum of power that is coming onto the grid every year. So we hope to sign several PPAs this year and in subsequent years as well. And as we are signing these PPAs, we're executing vesting contracts with distribution companies to resell the power. We actually signed 11 vesting contracts in February of this year as well. At the same time, we signed the 7 PPAs. The principal function of the bulk trader, like I mentioned, is to incentivize private sector investments in the Nigerian power sector by basically telling the whole world, Nigeria is open for business. Come and invest in Nigeria. There is a credit-worthy entity the government has set up to ensure that if you put down your dollars in Nigeria in the power generation segment of the value chain, you're going to get your money back. So we negotiate the PPA and ensure that you get paid. And of course, like I mentioned here, The PPAs will be backed by a securitization package that includes the World Bank PRG. There's a chart, a diagram I'll go through subsequently to highlight how this mechanism works, how the World Bank fits into the whole reform process of the Nigerian power sector. So with the World Bank, you have the PRG, but you also have the meager political insurance. These two instruments work hand in hand. While the PRG provides payment guarantee for the payment obligations of the bulk trader as they fall due under the PPAs, meager political insurance comes in the case of termination, because the PRG does not cover termination scenarios. If the PPA is terminated, then what happens is that you've put down your $500 million investment in Nigeria. What happens to your investment? Meager political insurance gives you that cover by assuring you that if the PPA is terminated and you are successful, assuming there's a dispute, first of all, the government may decide to pay you off without a dispute. If government decides not to pay you, what do? You go to arbitration. If you win your arbitration and the government fails to pay you, MEGA will pay you, and MEGA will now go and sort out the issue with the federal government of Nigeria. So these instruments, the bulk trader, the capitalization of the bulk trader, the PRG mechanism, and the MEGA political insurance are all things that government has put in place to incentivize private sector entities to come and invest in Nigeria, so that we can actually start ramping up power generation and see whether we can get anywhere close to where South Africa is at the moment. I mean, we have a vision of attaining 40,000 megawatts by 2020. That's a long way off if we are still doing about anywhere between 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 megawatts. If you factor in that a megawatt, like I mentioned earlier, is about $1 million, 40,000 megawatts, we're talking about $40 billion. Government cannot afford that kind of money. So it's critical that government actually puts in place key incentives to ensure that other people, private sector funds can actually come in and help us to ramp up our power generation. Since inauguration, we've been negotiating PPAs. Like I mentioned, we've executed some PPAs already. And the PPAs we executed in February are brownfield PPAs. Brownfields, as in the plants are already in existence and are being sold to investors. But we're in the process of, we expect that this month we'll be able to execute the first project-financed IPP PPA in Nigeria. And this is actually a big deal for us because this is actually private sector funds coming in to build a totally greenfield project that we hope that if all goes well and we execute the PPA, that in the next, say about 3 years, we can actually start having new power on the grid. Part of the challenge that's been facing the Nigerian power sector is that even when we say that we have about 4,000 megawatts or 3,000 megawatts, the fact is that a lot of these plants are very old. And so what you have is like trying to maintain a vehicle that is 30 years old. Where do you start? You change the crankshaft today, the bumper falls off. You change the bumper, the wheels come off. You change the wheels, the seats fall apart. So that's why it looks like one step forward, 2 steps backwards. You're putting in so much money into refurbishing and repairing these old plants, and they keep breaking down. But we hope that the bulk trader will be able to incentivize brand new power so that in the next 3-4 years, we can actually say that we have several thousands of brand new megawatts coming onto the grid in Nigeria. Now, this is transitional market structure. So basically, the way it works is that the NBT sits there in the middle. We are executing PPAs with the generation. The ones in blue are the ones that we've already signed. We signed in February. The ones that are being privatized. The ones in white, the existing IPPs, are the ones some of them are the ones we are taking over. Some are the ones that we are still negotiating their PPAs. And then as we are buying the power, you can see that you see the arrows going down to the pink boxes. We are selling the power, so the bulk trader is not expected to hold residual risks. Whatever we buy, we sell completely to the distribution companies. The PPA negotiation process. So basically, one of the things we've tried to do at the bulk trader is to have a very orderly and transparent manner for negotiating our PPAs. We start off by sending a non-disclosure agreement to you because when you're developing a project, there's a lot of sensitive information that you want to be sure that this information is not misused. So that's what we start off with, protecting your information. And then we send you the draft PPA after you've satisfied our key due diligence requirements. What are these requirements? To ensure that people are actually, one of the things we've seen at the bulk trader is that a lot of potential developers, I call them potential, they may not fully appreciate how much it costs to develop a power project. You know, anybody can wake up and say, I want to build a power plant. Do you know how much it costs? If you're talking about $500 million, and you say that maybe it's 70-30 debt equity ratio, okay, first of all, where do you get your 30% equity? Do you have it in the bank? You know, so by the time you lay out the full cost, some people get scared, you know, because they don't understand that it costs so much to, for instance, do an environmental impact assessment that is worth anything, that it costs a lot to acquire land for your project, to do all the project feasibility studies. It costs so much. So one of the things we try to do is we have our due diligence requirements. If you meet these requirements, it tells us that this developer is a serious developer to engage. So what do we ask for? We ask you, have you acquired your land for building your plant? If you say yes, we tick. Have you, the place where you want to build your plant, is there transmission facility? Because we cannot, some people may simply say, I want to build a plant near the airport in order to supply power to the airport. Have you engaged the transmission company of Nigeria to find out whether that place where you want to build your plant, it's possible to hook up your plant to the grid? What of your fuel source? Where are you getting your fuel from? Is it gas? Are you engaging the gas aggregation company to get your gas? Or if it's solar, how are you going about your solar, getting your solar? Have you done your feasibility studies? So we ask these questions, and when we are satisfied that these questions have been answered in the affirmative, we proceed to negotiate, start the PPA negotiation process. So it goes back and forth. Apart from the PPA, as we're looking at your PPA, we're looking at the other projects, the other doc agreements that impact on the PPA, your EPC contract, your gas contract, your grid connection agreement, your insurance agreements. We look at all these other agreements that affect your power project and ensure that these agreements all synchronize. And then we have to investigate your land title and other project documents before we get to the point of initialing and executing your PPA. The PRG mechanism, this is the way it works. You see the bulk trader in the green box there. So if a project, we've negotiated the PPA, and the question is, what if the bulk trader does not pay me? So you see the yellow box there. That's a letter of credit from a commercial bank. So the way it works is that if the bulk trader, after signing this 20-year PPA, fails to pay the IPP, what happens? The IPP goes to the LC bank and pulls the money because there's an LC there already. They get paid through the LC. And when they get paid through the LC, what happens is that the LC bank will tell the bulk trader, we just made a payment that you should have made, reimburse us. If the bulk trader fails to make that reimbursement, the LC bank will go to the World Bank to get that money. So it's actually a chain that ensures that at any point in time, the IPP is not left out of pocket. Somebody must pay for that power. If it's not the bulk trader, it's the LC bank. If the LC bank makes the payment, they go to the World Bank. If the World Bank makes the payment, what do? They go to the federal government, because they also have an indemnity agreement with the federal government. We've made a payment that the bulk trader should have made, reimburse us. And in event of termination, what happens is that, as you can see, the arrow linking FGN and the IPP, there's a meager termination guarantee that ensures that the IPP gets reimbursed for its investment in Nigeria. The key elements of risk allocation. One of the key things, when we are looking at PPA negotiations, what do? We try to ensure that the risks are fairly balanced. And of course, the rule of the thumb is that risks should be assigned to the parties best able to manage these risks. And so, MBET will bear the payment risk. We have to pay you for your power. However, the developer has to develop the project. If you don't develop your project and you never attain COD, tough luck, it's not our fault. So you have to ensure that you have a good EPC contract, you have good OEM arrangement to ensure that your power plant actually comes on stream. Because if it doesn't come on stream, it's a non-starter. And then we also take on some of the risks that actually are attributable to some other government entities, like transmission. If your power plant is ready to put power on the grid, but the transmission line is down, we pay you for your power because you've done your own part. If your gas is ready to be delivered to your plant, but the gas transportation line is down, because the gas transportation line is owned by the government, by a government company, we pay you for your power because your plant cannot run because of a fact that a fault that has absolutely nothing to do with you. You've actually built your plant. So risks that are attributable to other government entities, apart from NBT, we try to shoulder them. And of course, local political force majeure or expropriation of your project, we take on that risk. So right now, the bulk trader, we are trying to develop a firm PPA. When I say a firm PPA, we mean a PPA that is in a generic form. However, it will be customized for each project. So by the time you sit down for negotiations, we start to look at your project specifics and we start to amend the PPA to suit your project. We've almost finished the process of developing this firm PPA. Future projections. What we expect is that as more PPAs are signed, new power will be ushered into the country, broadening the power market. I mean, it would be a shame if bulk trader is in the power sector for the next 5 years, and we're still talking about 3,000 megawatts or 3,500 or 4,000. It will really be, we'll all put our heads down in shame. So we hope that we can actually sign PPAs that will bring new power onto the grid. Right now, we hope that distribution companies will ultimately attain creditworthiness, making it possible for bulk trader to actually start to exit the market. And finally, we hope that Nigerian power sector will ultimately reach the promised land so that we can all take power for granted in anything we are doing. Thank you very much.